So the Las Vegas Raiders are obviously in the need for a quarterback, and we've heard a lot of rumors and reports over the past couple of weeks, especially as the Raiders hire their offensive coordinator and more so the actual head coach, and that is Pete Carroll. And people have now been speculating who's going to be the Las Vegas Raiders' next quarterback. Some people have said maybe it's Russell Wilson, which definitely could make sense since Russell Wilson was brought in by a guy in Pete Carroll, and Pete Carroll won a Super Bowl with Russell Wilson. And some people are saying there's a chance Russell Wilson comes back to the Raiders, and an NFL insider and Jay Glazer has basically shut that down. Jay Glazer, to me, is arguably the best insider out there, right? You can make the argument he's neck and neck with a guy like Ian Rappaport. Jay Glazer, to me, is a very, very, very solid and reliable source, and he's basically putting it out there. If there's no chance that Russell Wilson and Pete Carroll are going to get together, I want you guys to listen into this, and we'll talk about it on the other side.
Speaking of a guy like that, Russell Wilson obviously has had a long career and going back to free agency. Pete Carroll, I mean, this is kind of connecting dots.
That ain't going to happen.
That one's over, right?
That's not going to happen.
That one's over. Do you think it's more likely Russ goes back to the Steelers? Because the ending there was
think that's
also
gonna
a little
happen either.
weird, too. So just a new start for Russ.
I think you'll see a new start for Russell somewhere else.
So there you guys have it, right? Jay Glazer is basically saying Pete Carroll, Russell Wilson getting together once again. It's not happening. And I believe Jay Glazer when he says that. To me, that basically means the Raiders will look elsewhere. And we'll talk about some of the quarterback options here in a second. But it's interesting nonetheless because, Jay Glazer also does throw it in there that the Raiders will not be bringing in Russell Wilson, nor will the Steelers. Russell Wilson plans to ultimately go out there and pick a brand new team. And if you guys think about this, there's at least two teams that are going to potentially draft the quarterback before the Raiders. The Tennessee Titans have the number 1 overall pick, and the New York Giants have the number 3 overall pick. Both teams are kind of in need of quarterbacks. But what could be interesting is there's a chance that one of those two teams goes down the path of Russell Wilson. Now, the Titans probably make more sense from a roster perspective, but since they have the first overall pick, that probably wouldn't make sense for them. But I say the Titans, it could make sense for them because they have Will Levis. If you're ready to give up on Will Levis, sure, go out and get Cam Ward, draft him. He's the number 1 overall quarterback in this class. But if you're not 100% sure that Will Levis is not the guy, and I'll be the first to tell you guys, man, Will Levis has a good arm, right? He has good ball placement. He can get it done. The big concern right now with Will Levis is, can he process information at the right time? Can he read coverages quick enough? And usually that type of stuff, you get better in year 5, 6, and 7, the way we've seen guys like Baker Mayfield and Sam Darnold ultimately get a lot better. To me, it'd be interesting to see if the Tennessee Titans are willing to bring in Russell Wilson and potentially allow a guy like Will Levis to develop for 1 or 2 years, right? It'd be interesting to me to see if the Tennessee Titans are willing to kind of make that happen, as opposed to taking, whatever rookie quarterback it is that they ultimately take. I do think it could make sense if they're not 100% out on Will Levis, but something tells me they're probably out on Will Levis, which means they'll probably end up taking the number 1 quarterback. But that means a team like the Giants could potentially come in and say, Russell Wilson, come in here. We have young talent, right? They have a really good young running back, a really good wide receiver 1. They have some weapons on the offensive side. Maybe they can utilize that 3rd overall pick on the best offensive tackle or the best defensive end or the best overall weapon, right? Depending on, maybe it's Travis Hunter, maybe it's one of the other guys, Ashton Genty, or one of these other guys. The Giants could do a whole lot with that 3rd overall pick. And there's a chance if Cam Ward goes 1, the Giants could bring in Russell Wilson and say, let's get an offensive tackle, let's get a defensive lineman, or whatever it might be. And that allows you to actually get a lot better, and it might let you compete right away as opposed to saying, let's get a rookie and let's wait it out, like 2, 3, 4 years until it's time for us to actually compete, right? Because let's be honest, most quarterbacks that are young, it takes them 4, 5, 6 years to ultimately have success, right? And at least consistently be able to have success the way we've seen, Jalen Hurts and Josh Allen consistently have that success. Patrick Mahomes is the exception. He's not the rule, right? What Patrick Mahomes has done, that's not normal, right? Most people, it takes them a couple of years to develop. And it'll be interesting to see which team does decide to go with which quarterback. But it does seem like at this point, the Raiders are out on Russell Wilson. Now, I do think the Raiders do have a couple of options they can still, potentially go down. I don't think the Raiders should bring in Justin Fields. I'm not a believer in Justin Fields. Truth be told, I saw him with Luke Getsy. I knew Luke Getsy sucked, so I wanted to see him with another coach. I saw him with the Steelers. The processing's just not quick enough. To me, if a quarterback's not a quick processor, if he can't read, the pre-snap, it's a cover 2. I want to go maybe in the middle of the field. Maybe I want to go right over the corner playing the flats out there towards the boundary. If you can't process post, if you can't process pre-snap and you can't get the ball out quickly, and I understand when guys mix coverages, I understand when there's pressure, but like playing within the basic structure of an offense, if you can't do that successfully, and I think at this point we've seen Justin Fields in 2 separate schemes, he can't do it. I would not take Justin Fields at this time from the Raiders, but you can still go down and get other quarterbacks, right? Kirk Cousins is available. There's quarterbacks out there that could be available, either Sam Darnold, J.J. McCarthy, really depending on who the Vikings want to stick with. You have some other free agent quarterbacks, right? I know Russell Wilson's technically available. Maybe we're out on him. Ryan Tannehill is available, and I know those are like veteran guys. You're not 100% sure if you want to go with those guys. But then you even have a guy like Aiden O'Connell, Gardner Minshew, and maybe the quarterback you sign, you kind of let those 3 guys compete and figure it out. Obviously, I'm not out on taking a rookie quarterback either. I do think with Chip Kelly specifically, one of the things we got to realize is Chip Kelly might actually prefer a rookie quarterback. Right, there's a chance Chip Kelly says, we're going to run this offense, we're going to install it this way. I want to bring in a smart quarterback that can run these things exactly how I want. And even if the Giants, even if the Titans take a quarterback 1 and 2, remember last year around this time, people were like, J.J. McCarthy's a 3rd-round pick, Michael Penix is a 2nd-round pick. Even Jaden Daniels wasn't guaranteed to be the quarterback 2 in this class. Like, there was so much kind of going on with everything. And usually what ends up happening is, over the next month and a half, we're going to start to see some of these quarterbacks solidify themselves. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if we still see 3 or 4 or even 5 quarterbacks going in the first round this year. Jackson Dart looks really, really good. I watched his tape earlier today. The guy can make every pass. A very, very good arm. I've obviously watched Cam Ward. He's my QB1. It's very, very solid as well. But even aside from that, guys like Kyle McCord is very, very impressive. Same with Will Howard. These are good quarterbacks. And of course, with Chip Kelly, he has that connection to Will Howard at this point, right? So it would be very, very interesting to see what the Raiders do end up actually doing at the quarterback position. We'll probably find out a lot as free agency approaches in the next couple of weeks. After free agency, the draft's right then, right there as well. And if the Raiders are going to not go with either of the 2, then we know it's going to be Gardner Minshew or Aiden O'Connell again this year, right? And I'm okay with that. I think your offensive coordinator is the most important aspect of a quarterback having success. Some of you guys are new to this channel, so you guys don't know my philosophy on this. But Kyle Shanahan can take Jimmy Garoppolo to the Super Bowl. He can take Brock Purdy to the Super Bowl. He can take Gardner Minshew to the Super Bowl, right? If Kyle Shanahan is that type of coach, that means quarterbacks don't matter as much. Right? To me, it means that quarterbacks, depending on the scheme and system, are going to play better or going to be worse. Right? We saw that with Gardner Minshew with the Colts versus the Raiders. We saw that with Jimmy G with Kyle Shanahan and the 49ers as opposed to Josh McDaniels and the Raiders. There's a big difference with certain quarterbacks, with certain coaches, and I think with Chip Kelly's a good coach. I think our 2 quarterbacks would have a lot more success with Chip Kelly than they would ever have with Luke Getsy, who's a really, really, really poor coach. Right? So we'll see what ends up actually happening. I am excited for the Raiders season as it kind of goes forward because, although it's called the off season, really it's a team building season, right? It's the process and the part where you're able to make moves and transactions and get better as a football team. And truth be told, this is where the season is won right here, right? So we'll see what actually ends up happening. Now, before we go forward, I want to just give a big shout out to the sponsor of this channel, that is Underdog Fantasy, who has been the sponsor of this channel for the course of this past season. I want to give them a big shout out because without their support, the stuff that we're doing on this channel would not be possible. Right? I spend 3-4 hours every day making content. And if it wasn't for Underdog supporting the channel, I would not have the ability to make this content, right? So big shout out to Underdog. I want to share with you guys the final picks of the season. This one, we're going big on this one, man. We're going absolutely big on this one. Let's just go through this really quickly, right? I think 4 of the 5 are definitely going to happen. Jalen Carter needs at least 1 sack. I think that's going to happen. DeAndre Hopkins needs 13 receiving yards. I think that's definitely going to happen. Travis Kelce, will he have at least 1 touchdown? I think that's going to happen as well, right? Travis Kelce always comes up in these type of games. I find it very, very hard to believe this guy's not going to score at least a touchdown. And then Jalen Hurts needs to run for a touchdown, which I think he had 3 this past game, right? Against the Commanders. So I think there's a chance he only got the tush push. I think there's a chance he's going to quarterback sneak it for a touchdown. So 4 of the 5 are definitely realistic. Now, the one that's kind of not realistic, but it could happen, is Patrick Mahomes having at least one catch. And I'm going to walk you guys through this here in a second, but the reason why the payout is so big is because that Patrick Mahomes getting a catch, it's going to basically take, the sum of the other 4 picks. It's going to multiply about like 8 or 9, right? So it makes the payout much, much, much higher. Without Patrick Mahomes, the payout's like $800. But with it, it hits to 2,000. Now, here's the thing. Patrick Mahomes, if you guys don't know this, had a catch, I think like 2 or 3 weeks ago, in which the Chiefs drew up some sort of trick play. I think there's a real chance Andy Reid's going to come out and run like 5 plays we've never seen before. He does it every year, right? Where Andy Reid will create some sort of new concept. It's not create, he copies, right? He copies a new type of concept from one of these other high school or college teams that he sees out there. I think there's a real chance they're going to run some sort of trick play. And there's a chance that Patrick Mahomes ends up with the catch, right? So, yeah, the chances of it's probably low, but it's fantasy football. It's the final one, right? It's underdog. It's their pick'em game. Love it. But we'll see what ends up happening, man. Now, with that being stated, let's go ahead and get right back into the content. We got 2 things that I want to just quickly touch on. Josh Jacobs apparently talked a little bit about how things ended with him and the Las Vegas Raiders. And in this, as he talked about this, he basically put it out there that, I wish I was able to, stick with the Raiders. I wish I was able to be with the Raiders long term. And that just ended up not happening, right? And in this, he basically put it out there that it was not up to me. I had that monstrous season that I had, and I wanted to sign with the Raiders a long-term extension. And the organization at that point told me that we're not extending you. We're not going to lock you in long-term. We're going to franchise you basically for this season. And then after this season, after we franchise you, we'll see what ends up happening. And Josh Jacobs said at that point, I realized that the organization did not want me long-term. And he didn't necessarily say like Mark Davis didn't want me long-term. He basically said the people in charge at that time, right? So at that time, Dave Ziegler and Josh McDaniels were the guys in charge, right? After Josh McDaniels had that monstrous season. And those guys decided we don't want to extend Josh Jacobs long-term. And then, of course, they got fired. Tom Plesko ended up coming in. And Josh could have technically signed a contract. But from the reports, the Raiders and Josh never spoke about a contract. And I think that was more so Josh Jacobs decided he didn't want to be with the Raiders. But he still talked a little bit about it. And to me, I understand from Josh Jacobs' perspective that you had a monstrous season. You wanted to get paid. You wanted that contract. And the Raiders never really reached out and actually said, we're going to sign you long term. Instead, the Raiders wanted to say, well, we'll sign you for a year. And that's kind of it. I've always said this, that Josh Jacobs is a good football player. He's a solid running back, but running backs are fairly easy to replace. And I don't hate the fact that the Raiders let Josh Jacobs walk, but I do hate the fact that Tom Telesco didn't actually draft the running back in last year's class. Right? There were a lot of really, really good running backs that came out this past year that the Raiders could have potentially brought in, and we didn't bring any of these guys in. We took Dylan Labe. Labe hasn't shown us anything, right? But hopefully this year, John Spytek, who's drafted running backs over the past couple of seasons, hopefully the Raiders actually do that this year, right? John Spytek specifically. Hopefully he's able to draft the running back for the Raiders, and hopefully we end up having success from the run game because we really struggled last year with the run game, and I think a part of that was because the talent just wasn't there. But again, just wanted to kind of say that I understand from Josh Jacobs' perspective. Definitely gives me a little bit of a different feeling towards Josh because he was able to explain how he felt about the Raiders not willing to give him that extension when he ultimately deserved it, right? Having that rushing title, I think it was fair that they should have done it. And keep in mind, he still ended up playing that final year with the Raiders when he didn't have to. And he even touched on that a little bit, saying my goal in that final year I was with the Raiders was just to come and play in that final 4 games and not play at all the rest of the season. If he plays 4 games, you get credit for the season. And that was his goal. I'll play 4 games and that's it. And he says, I ended up basically changing my mind and I decided to play the rest of the season. All right, so shout out to Josh for that. Hopefully he continues to have success with the Green Bay Packers. And then finally, I want to wrap this up. Apparently there's some bad blood between the Raiders and Ben Johnson. And it's just weird to me, right? I just wanted to quickly touch on this a little bit. So apparently Ben Johnson's mad at the Las Vegas Raiders. And I'm not going to get into the entire article. But basically, Ben Johnson was forced to take an interview with the Raiders. And that's kind of why there's apparently some bad blood between Ben Johnson and the Raiders. And we know this because Ben Johnson's agent went out there and basically trashed the Raiders, saying Ben Johnson was never going to take that job. But I let the media reports kind of just circulate a little bit. I didn't want to shut them down. I kind of just let it happen. But basically, the report says this. Ben Johnson only wanted to interview with whatever team he realistically wanted to take the job of. And the Bears were one of those teams. And, apparently something happened where the Raiders put a request in anyways. And he felt like, hey, because the Raiders put that request in, I was basically forced to take the interview, which, you're not really forced. You can always just say, no, I don't want to interview with the Raiders. But he said that it would have made him essentially look bad had he not taken that interview with the Raiders. And I think it was his agent that said that specifically. First and foremost, to me, that's just a weird-ass story, right? If Ben Johnson did not want the job with the Raiders, regardless if the Raiders put the interview in for you, just say no. It's not that big of a deal. It really does not matter. If you don't want the job, don't interview for the job. To me, that's a sign of weakness. Straight up. It just really is, right? For you to feel like, I don't want to look bad if I turn the interview request down or whatever. It just doesn't make sense to me. But apparently, the agent's been out there, talking and commenting and doing whatever. But it's interesting nonetheless, right? That some people are saying that, Ben Johnson didn't really want the job, but he was kind of forced into taking the interview. He didn't want to look bad that he had declined Tom Brady or whatever, but it is what it is. And then I just want to give a quick shout out as well. Eric Allen officially made the Pro Football Hall of Fame in 2025. So shout out to the former Raider. Let me know what you guys think, man. Thumbs up, subscribe, and I'll see you guys next time with another video.